I've been a self-development junkie ever since I was literally 18 years old. Ever since I accepted the fact that I was going to have to, I guess, figure out how to be a normal human in the world and give up what? Performing, being an artist in some way, shape, or form. The only thing that's ever been my identity. And so I started searching for an identity. I started taking every personality test that I could online. I learned everything I could. And, going into college, not at the school I wanted, not with the major I wanted, being completely unable to envision a future for myself that I actually liked, that seemed possible at 18, I know. At that point, one of the things that really gave me comfort was the Myers-Briggs personality test, or later I learned Carl Jung's theory of cognitive functions. I learned that I was an intuitive type. I learned that I was a feeling type, an ENFJ to be specific. And so recognizing that there was a pattern, that there were others out there like me, that I wasn't broken for having a tendency toward extroversion, feeling, intuition, judging. And when you're an intuitive and a judger, the way in which that works is more in that visionary leadership kind of way rather than the managerial, detail-oriented kind of way. Learning I was an ENFJ, I accepted a lot about myself, that even if I didn't have a role in society that made me feel seen, I was still seeing myself. And I think that that is the biggest value that a tool like personality type could ever have, is just that it gives you a lens to see yourself. But the thing is, you shouldn't stop there, because seeing the self is kind of the first step. Seeing the self from a new lens could be the thing that gives you the feedback and the space to allow yourself to grow and emerge. When you recognize who you are, you can have more control over the autonomy that you do have, and you can let it go when there are things that are not within your control. What is that? Like the serenity prayer. Let me know the things what I can control versus what I can't, and the strength to know the difference. I'm butchering that. I can't control the person that I was born into. I can't control my inherent tendencies. But when I know my tendencies, I can start to look at my shadow. I can start to accept what my strengths are. And when you see that there's a shadow side to the strength, every strength you have, there's a shadow side, there's a weakness. In order to have a tendency for feeling, that leaves a gap in the thinking. In order to have a tendency for intuiting, that leaves a gap in the sensing. Now, in order to be great, in order to actually wield your strengths, you can't be afraid to look at the shadow, and you can't get your ego so attached to what it is that you're good at that you leave these gaps just there to fester. Because if you start to get into the one-sidedness, the division in the Western mind that Jung talked about literally almost 100 years ago at this point, you get stuck in that one-sidedness, you start to think you're right, or you get so attached to this is who I am, this is who I'm not, that you are not able to emerge into the wholeness that is you. The capital S self, as Jungians call it. Now, I've been on this journey for a while, like over a decade at this point, and I feel like the idea of the self, that when we think about individuation and shadow work, that point we're trying to get to, where we recognize our persona that we were born into, we recognize our ego's natural tendencies. But in order to get to the self, the ego has to be humble enough to look at its own shadow. The ego has to be willing to grow. The ego cannot wield its strengths without reconciling the gaps of the weaknesses. We used to live in a world where there were pathways and jobs and identities for the 16 types, for whatever your ego's tendency was. If you were a people person, great, go get a people person job. If you were a numbers person, go get a numbers person job. Guess what? We can't do that anymore. The people person jobs need to look at data, and the numbers jobs need to think about the ethics of technology. So what are we going to do? We can't cling to our egos. We have to think in paradox. We have to think creatively, and we have to be willing to lean into complexity, even if that allows us to see the messiness of our shadow. And as I've been on this self-discovery journey, this capital S self that Jung talks about, I'm wanting to take it a step further for this world of 2025 that we live in, because while the self has always been something bigger than the persona of an ENFJ, INFP, whatever, I think that pathways to getting there look different. And so lately myself, I've been thinking about it in terms of artist development rather than self-development. And because we don't have a straight line of ego development, and we aren't going to have that same midlife crisis where we crash that a lot of Jungians talk about, where we develop our ego, we get all the things our ego wants, and then we crash. Millennials and younger generations, we've been spiraling over and over and over our entire adult lives. We've had no choice but to confront the shadow over and over and over, because we don't have linear pathways to developing the ego. We don't have the resources to develop the ego. The only pathways we have are cyclical, and the only pathways we have are going to require us to tap into our shadow. How do we do that? We have to think like an artist. We have to use creative methods for self-discovery. We have to allow our self-discovery to fuel our art, and we have to think about our art as the engine of what fuels us on the path to developing our artist avatar, our artist persona. That is, I think, similar to Jung's concept of the self. I just think about, like, Beyonce talks about Sasha Fierce as like a version of her. Saint Vincent, if you are familiar with her, an avatar version of Annie Clark. Artists have come up with an alias or a persona for years and years, because when you allow the ego to have separation between you as the self and the vessel that is fueling the art, you allow yourself to be more humble, you allow yourself to look at the shadow, you allow yourself to be messy with it and make mistakes and trip up with it. You allow something magical to come through you, and that is the work of artist development. I don't know, for me it just feels more motivating, more fun, more real to think about it as artist development rather than self-development, because at the end of the day, I don't want to be micromanaging myself. I don't want to be looking for flaws. I don't want to feel like I'm always having to improve, or that who I am right now is not okay or is not enough. The point of life is to continuously evolve and grow and change. If you're not growing, you're decaying and you're dying. Rather than being fueled by the fault finding, we could be fueled by something exciting. We could be creating and crafting ourselves through an artistic lens, and we could be a part of the process. We can come fully alive and tap in to being a fellow co-creator of our journey. So, who do you want to be?